Let's talk about how corruption works. Every government on the face of the earth for the last 10,000 years has been dealing with corruption, and we still haven't eliminated it yet. There's still a lot of it left. So you have to wonder, why is that? You would think with 10,000 years of evolution and advancement, we would have gotten it all by now, and yet we haven't. That tells you that there's something deeper to corruption that we don't understand. We're not approaching it in the right ways. So to approach it in the right ways, what we have to do is we have to question it existentially. What is it really? What are the underlying mechanics? We can't just simply dismiss it as, oh, there are some evil, bad people over there who are corrupt. We have to look at it deeper. So the key questions for us now are, what is corruption and why does it happen? Have you ever wondered that? Like on an existential level, why does corruption exist within reality at all? Why is this so prevalent within governments and other organizations? It turns out to be a deep existential problem, which we're going to explore here. Don't think that corruption is only limited to the government. There are a lot of partisan, simplistic ideas about how corruption works, where people get the idea that, oh, well, one party is corrupt. No, it's not that one party is corrupt. Every single party, every single government across eras and centuries and millennia, across all the continents on the earth where humans have lived, have dealt with corruption. So it ain't a problem of a single party that you don't like. It's a much broader problem. This problem of eliminating corruption is really synonymous with the problem of eliminating evil. That's what we're talking about. So you can't eliminate corruption unless you understand what evil is, which of course I've talked about previously in various episodes, which I'll be referencing some of those that are pertinent as we go forward. But I have multiple episodes about good versus evil and how evil works and what the devil is and all that sort of stuff. Why is evil so hard to eliminate? That's what we'll be discussing today. See, people misunderstand why corruption happens, which ironically then contributes and adds gasoline on top of the fire and only deepens the corruption. That's part of the problem. But before we get into that, a quick reminder here. I did just launch on Patreon recently, a few weeks ago. I really appreciate your support and your donations for supporting this channel. Your contributions go to making improvements to this channel, to, for example, buying better equipment. I just yesterday purchased a $5,000 camera. It's going to be a new camera, an upgrade from what I have right now. So right now what you're seeing is not the new camera. This is the old stuff. The new stuff, I'm still waiting for it to ship and to arrive. It'll probably come in the next few weeks, and then I'll have to experiment and test it out and get it to work and all that. That'll take some time, but hopefully that will improve the image quality. And I'm also probably going to make improvements to the website in the future, maybe improvements to the forum, this sort of stuff. Your funds help with that and open up new possibilities for expanding Actualized.org into the future. So thanks a lot for that. You can click the link down below and become a patron if you find value in this content. And that helps me to keep this content free of sponsorships and a bunch of ads and other corrupting influences, speaking of which. So now let's get back to the topic at hand. So corruption, notice, doesn't just happen in government. It also happens in organizations of any stripe. It also happens within relationships. It happens within spirituality and religion. It happens within science and academia. It happens with food, the food industry. It happens within education, the education system and industry. It happens with sex, the whole Me Too movement. What is that about? This is about abuses of sexual power, basically. It's a form of corruption, you might say. Corruption happens in sports. Corruption happens in the military during wartime. Corruption happens in police departments, in families. The healthcare system can be corrupt. And in fact, in America, we have one of the most corrupt healthcare systems in the world for a developed country compared to many European countries and so on. The media can be corrupt. Businesses can be corrupt. The environment can get corrupt or be corrupted. Judges and attorneys and the entire legal system can be corrupted. Political parties can be corrupt. Computer systems and computer files can be corrupt, of course, as you know. Even minds can get corrupt. In fact, that is the root of all of this corruption that we're talking about. If it's an external corruption, like a corruption in a political party, or corruption of the environment, or corruption of the military, where does it begin? It begins here. This is what's running the whole show, your mind. All the human minds combined are running the show. Even DNA can get corrupted. Genetic mutations and so forth, leading to cancer and other kinds of illnesses and dysfunctions. Industries can be corrupt. For example, Hollywood is getting more and more corrupt, it seems, with the kind of movies they release. They're not really focused on releasing high-quality movies. They're focused on releasing movies that earn them the most money. These popcorn flicks, these superhero movies that there's just an endless stream of, losing the artistic value, sacrificing artistic value for money and for maximizing sales. Video games are also getting more and more corrupt. As you notice, video games have loot boxes in them nowadays, all sorts of paid schemes, gambling, basically virtual gambling taking place in video games. That's what you've seen as a gamer over the last 10 years especially. You've seen the corruption of the video game industry with microtransactions and all that sort of stuff, DLC, and various other sneaky tactics that industry uses. And, there's thousands of industries, and all of them have corruption in them. And you can easily get sucked into this corruption too. See? Because a lot of times this corruption is sneaky. It's subtle. It's hidden. It lurks in the shadows. You don't know that you're getting corrupted while you're getting corrupted. You might just be entering the industry. You might be one of those bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, people who goes to Hollywood and wants to make it in the world of Hollywood and wants to be successful as a director, or as a producer, or as an actor or something. And then the industry will suck you into the corruption. And of course, the same thing happens if you go to Washington or to your local capital and run for government and all this. There's always these forces of corruption. So what is all this about? What's really going on here? Well, first, let's turn to a definition of what corruption is. Here are some definitions just from various online dictionaries that I've compiled for you to get you a little bit of a clearer sense. Number one, corruption is dishonest or fraudulent conduct by those in power. Number two, the abuse of entrusted power for personal or private gain. That's an important one. We'll circle back to that one. Number three, a departure from the original or from what is pure or correct. So this third one is a more of an abstract notion of corruption which goes beyond political exploitation and human activities. Number four, a process by which something, typically a word or expression, is changed from its original use or meaning to one that is regarded as erroneous or debased. That's an interesting definition. This one almost dovetails with our discussion about impermanence. See my episode, Understanding Impermanence, where I talk about how everything in reality is always changing. So that should, if you combine these two concepts together, that should get you a little bit of a kind of a hint or a clue that maybe what's going on is that everything in reality is constantly changing. So if we want to fix the meaning of a particular word or an expression, if we're talking about linguistic corruption here, or you want to fix the meaning of let's say, of a Shakespearean play in literature, and you want to say, well, this particular, Hamlet means this particular thing, but then, those interpretations change over time. That is impermanence. That is evolution happening. See? And then, of course, who gets to say what is a corruption and what isn't? You see? That's also a very important point here. What people don't understand about corruption, generally speaking, is that they assume that corruption is some sort of black and white affair where there's like some laws written down by God somewhere which says that this is the good stuff over here and this is the bad stuff over here, and don't do this stuff because this is corruption, but this stuff here is not corruption. But of course, this is not how reality works. In reality, the concept of corruption itself is completely relativistic. So what's corrupt from my point of view may not be corrupt from your point of view. Who's to say which interpretation of Shakespeare's Hamlet is the correct one? Who's to say what meaning for a particular word is the correct usage and meaning of that word? Of course, the English language has evolved and changed so much over the last 500 years. You go back, try to read Shakespeare's Hamlet, you can barely read it. Even though it's written in English, you can barely read it because the words and the meanings have become so corrupt. But who's to say whether they were corrupted or they were actually improved? You see, maybe if Shakespeare was brought back to life and he had to converse with us in our 21st century English, he would say, "You've corrupted my beautiful language." That might be his perspective. But of course, who's to say who's right? So this gets us into relativity. For more on that, go check out my 2-part series. Part 1, Understanding Relativity, or Understanding Relativism, I think I called it. And actually part 2, I still haven't released yet. I'll be releasing that one in the future. So that explores that in more detail. Definition number 5, impairment of moral principle, virtue, or values. And definition number 6, decay and decomposition, which goes more into impermanence. So this gets you a bit of an idea of what we're talking about. But what motivates corruption? What is the source of it? Corruption is selfishness, ego, or survival. All these words I'm going to be using interchangeably in this episode. I've talked a lot about them in the past. Specifically, see my 2-part series, Understanding Survival, Part 1 and Part 2, where we go into a lot of depth on that. Another word for corruption is devilry. I like that word. I use it quite a bit. I call people devils sometimes, or I speak of devilry. And to understand how I use that word, I use it in a bit of a nuanced way. Go watch my episode, a really important one of mine called What is the Devil?, where I explain that in more details. So you're going to need that idea of the devil to understand what I'll be talking about next. So that is really what corruption is devilry, which is selfishness, which is ego, which is survival. All that corrupt people are really doing is they're surviving. They're finding ways to survive at any cost, by any means. And that is how survival works. It's relentless. It doesn't care about the collateral damage. It has one objective, which is to survive the thing that you are identified with being. That's it. Whatever that is will determine what you feel you need to do and how corruption looks to you from your point of view, taking into account relativity, because everyone has a different identity that they're attached to that they're trying to survive. Therefore, there's competing identities that are all trying to survive. And so what looks like corruption from one person's point of view doesn't look like corruption from another's. See, the trick, though, here is that corruption is very easy to see in other people, but it's very hard to see within yourself. Just like it's very easy to tell when somebody is being selfish. But it's much harder to see when you're being selfish. It's easy, for example, to see when someone's being deluded or deceiving themselves. But it's really hard to tell when you are deluded and when you are deceiving yourself. That's really the problem that we're dealing with here. And this brings us to our most important insight of this whole episode. The crucial insight is that you are corrupt. Corruption is not some boogeyman out there. Corruption isn't some smog cloud hanging over Washington, D.C. You are corrupt. You are the source of corruption. And that is a very counterintuitive and unpalatable truth. Because you think you're an angel. You think you're a hero. And what I'm telling you is I'm telling you that you're the devil. So, do you want to accept that? Of course, if you're corrupt, you won't want to accept that, and you're going to deny it. See, the problem with corruption is that people think that they are going to fix corruption. You think that you are the solution to corruption. Your ego thinks that. Your ego thinks that if things are just done my way, if I get everything that I want, if reality is rearranged to suit me, that will fix all of corruption. Ta-da, solution. Easy, right? Just make everything the way that I want it. But of course, that very way of thinking is the thing that creates the corruption. Because when everybody behaves that way, then the ends justify the means, and then they use all sorts of devilish means to accomplish what they think is the best solution, and corruption ensues. You can't fix corruption until you deeply acknowledge to yourself that you are its chief cause. And you stop blaming others for it. That's the crucial mistake. And in politics, this gets weaponized, of course. Corrupt politicians will weaponize this to try to shift blame on other corrupt people, you see. They don't want to get you to actually look inwards to reflect on your own corruption. They don't want you to reflect about our collective corruption as a country, if we're Americans or whatever country you're from, doesn't matter. See, instead, what a country generally does is the politician will come to power and he'll say, it's not America that's corrupt, it's the rest of the world, it's the Middle East that's corrupt, it's Asia that's corrupt, and so forth. Now, of course, they probably are, because almost every government is corrupt, so calling somebody corrupt isn't really saying much. It's the pot calling the kettle black, you see. But what it is it's a very clever distraction. It's a red herring to get you to not look at our own corruption. Really, what we should be looking at as a nation, as Americans or whatever country you're from, you should be looking at the corruption within your own nation first and foremost. What is your nation doing to contribute to corruption? And what are you doing as an individual to contribute to the corruption of your nation? That's the critical question. And of course, this question never gets asked in the media or in political analysis. It almost never gets asked. So repeat after me. I am a shameless, corrupt devil. Take your finger and point it to yourself, to your chest, and repeat after me. I am a shameless, corrupt devil, and I am the source of all the world's evil. And point to yourself as you're doing this. Are you doing this? Are you saying this? Make sure you say this. Because I want it to register in you. And if you're noticing a resistance, like, but I don't want to say it. Leo, this isn't right. There you go. That's your corruption coming up. See? This is the first step in overcoming corruption, is admitting it. It's just like Alcoholics Anonymous. You got to admit you're an alcoholic. You got to admit that you're the devil. Then we can move forward beyond that and consider other solutions. The problem is that this first step is never taken by almost anybody. If you identify with being an American or whatever country you're from, you also have to admit and take responsibility for the collective corruption of your society and your country. And of course, you can go even one level higher and you can take responsibility for the corruption of the entire human species as well, because there's plenty of corrupt stuff that humans do as a species, independent of national borders. But, like we have to be honest with ourselves as Americans that, hey, we are very corrupt in terms of the way that we use our military around the world to serve our business interests. See? And you benefit from that as an American. You get lower gas prices, and you maybe get a better job, and you maybe get some tax breaks, whatever else. Maybe you work for one of these military defense contractors, and literally your paycheck depends upon that. See? Otherwise, you might not have that job. You got to take responsibility for that if you really care about fixing corruption. You see, now you understand why fixing corruption is so unpopular, really. Because you think that, by starting to fight corruption out there, that, we're going to defeat the evil ones out there. But then what happens is that you go full circle and you realize, oh, the corruption I thought that was out there actually circles back around in a strange, loopy sort of way and points right back to me. And then it's like, oh, so to fix the corruption of the world, I would have to fix myself. Oh, but that would mean I have to change myself. Oh, but I don't want to do that. That's the last thing I want to do. See, this is what's not recognized. It's very easy to rant against the corruption of others. It's much harder to carefully observe your own corruption and to let it go and to act with integrity. That's the real work here, both individually and collectively. I want you to consider the following possibility, that corrupt people are not actually evil in the way that they're portrayed in the media. Sometimes we see some corrupt politician get caught or some corrupt businessman get caught, and then he maybe even gets dragged out of his office in handcuffs. And then on the evening news, it says, oh, they caught some corrupt politician engaged in some sort of bribery scheme. They caught him red-handed and they handcuffed him and they dragged him to court and this, and then everybody looks at that and they sort of applaud and they say, good, that guy is evil. They talk about him as though he's the evil one, as though he's somehow some exception. He's not the exception. He's an ordinary person. He's just like you. That's what is not acknowledged and recognized. Corrupt people are not really evil. They're totally ordinary people put into situations of power and temptation and backed into a corner as far as their survival goes. All they're doing is they're just surviving. That's all they're doing. They're finding clever ways to survive. And then, of course, when you're really attached to survival, it's easy to find manipulative, opportunistic, parasitic ways of surviving. And that's what that politician was doing. He was being a parasite on the system for his own selfish gain. Why? Because he has desires, temptations. He wants sex, he wants money, he wants to send his kids to college, so of course he takes the bribe. Of course, you would too, most likely. Only if you're very careful and very conscious will you be able to resist that trap, that temptation. But see, what a lot of ordinary people underestimate is how much this problem gets magnified and amplified when you become much more successful and powerful and famous than you are right now. Most people are so far away from being super famous, super powerful, or super successful that never in their life do they even face those kind of temptations and that kind of power and responsibility that comes with being in a position of leadership towards the top of the hierarchy. See, so you might be thinking, but Leo, I would never take a bribe. I would never be involved in some sort of sex scandal in the White House or whatever. I would never do these sorts of things. I'm just an ordinary person. I live a comfortable, kind of easy life, and I'm not all obsessed by these ambitions and so forth. But what you have to understand is that for you to climb to the top of that hierarchy, to get to where some of these really famous, successful, powerful people get to, you're gonna have to have a lot of ambition to get there. You see, and by the time you get there and you put in all the work and all the time and all the energy to climb up there, and then you're there and people look up to you, people adore you, people shower you with praise, and people blow smoke up your ass, and people kiss your ass, and now you're powerful and you can control the lives of people, you can make or break people, you can sexually exploit people, you can make or break their careers. You determine who gets rich and who gets poor, this sort of stuff. You can throw your fame around, and your fame leads to more sex and to more money and all this. This becomes extremely tempting. See, much more tempting than you realize as an ordinary little person, if you haven't really pursued success seriously. And this, I think, most people underestimate. So even when you might start out life, let's say at the bottom of the hierarchy, You're not very wealthy, you're not very famous, you're not very successful. But then you work, you climb your way to the top, and you tell yourself, well, I will never betray my values for money or for sex or for opportunities or for success or for anything like that. But you get sucked into it slowly. It seeps into your mind slowly. And as you become more and more successful, the fruits of your success, they start to affect you. They start to make you complacent. They start to make you entitled. They start to make you feel like you deserve it. They start to make you have delusions of grandeur where you start to tell yourself a mythos of how you did it all by yourself. You pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. This sort of stuff. See? And this becomes very dangerous. And, we know many a celebrity in the news have destroyed their own lives with drugs and sex and food and various schemes and various kinds of lawlessness because, once you're some actor in Hollywood who everybody adores and everybody loves and everyone wants to have sex with and who has $50 million and, all this sort of stuff, like, nobody bosses you around. See? You have enormous power now. If you want, you can bully your employees, people who work for you, your personal assistants. You can throw telephones at them. If you get angry, you can throw beer bottles at them and whatever else. You can sexually abuse them. Yeah. And see, most people are not taught how to deal and cope with this kind of level of responsibility and this kind of level of power. Power magnifies corruption and ego by 100-fold. And whatever little character defects or shadow issues you have now as an ordinary little person, when you become successful and powerful and famous, I'm telling you, all those will get magnified, from little cracks into Grand Canyon-sized flaws. And you can really destroy yourself if you don't pay attention to those, and you can take down others close to you, your family and so forth. As you become more successful and powerful and famous, there's much more opportunity to exploit and to be manipulative. There's much more opportunity to be a bully. It becomes much easier to access sex, drugs, food, gifts, favors, deals, and to skirt the law in various ways, and to think that you won't get caught. Because white-collar crime isn't regulated and prosecuted nearly as seriously as kind of more traditional, classical, physical crime. Even though often it's much more dangerous and much more harmful, because it can affect millions of people, not just one person. And especially once you get on a roll of success, you start getting book deals and then tours, and then people know you more and your business is growing and growing. You're getting more clients, and then those clients lead to more clients, and it just becomes this sort of snowball of success. You might think, well, Leo, this is awesome. Be careful. Be careful. It's very easy to get lost in that success and then just want to one-up it every time. Every year you want to be more and more successful. And then in that drive for endless, infinite success, you end up becoming very corrupt. Materialism corrupts you. And then you don't even care about spirituality anymore because in your mind it's like, well, Leo, why should I meditate? Why should I do yoga? Why should I maintain my practices? Why should I spend all this time reading and practicing and doing all this stuff when I could just earn more money and then get everything I want with the money? That's a very tempting trap to fall into, but it doesn't actually work that way. It can lead to very disastrous consequences. See, the trick here is that the ego never sees its own survival as corruption. See, we're playing a game here of perceptual illusions. The mind is tricking itself in order to gain survival advantage. To do that, it's not that the mind is tricking others. First and foremost, the mind has to trick itself into feeling righteous about its survival agenda. And so your mind literally twists and contorts and distorts your perception such that what you see and how you think about reality itself, the actual structure of reality gets warped and distorted by your survival agenda, such that you can be highly corrupt, but not consider yourself to be corrupt. You can think of yourself as the good guy, the hero, the angel, while you're being a devil. Because from the ego's point of view, from the point of view of survival, corruption is what others do by definition. You see, that's how the ego distorts the notion of corruption. It's like you become so successful and powerful and famous that you start to think that you're above the law. You start to think you're above being bad. You start to think that you're above needing to worry about how you hurt people or the collateral damage that you cause, because there's no consequences, because you're so fucking powerful that nobody tells you anything. They can't, because you have so much power over them. See? And that in your mind just validates the fact that, hey, I'm perfect. I'm an angel. I'm doing good for the world. And corruption is just something that other people do. I could never do corruption. I'm always doing good. But of course, that's how every corrupt person thinks. Corruption is always excused and justified in the mind. It's amazing how powerful the mind is at excusing and justifying all sorts of devilry. It's amazing. That very process itself is the very heart of what devilry is. Devilry is not just you stealing candy from a baby. that sort of, brute force example. First and foremost, devilry is how you justify it to yourself, how you excuse that activity to yourself. Because you would never be able to get away with that activity in your own mind unless first you did some very sneaky self-deception. And of course, for a self-deception to be effective, it has to be deceptive, which means that you have to not notice it. It has to go under the radar of your own awareness, which means it has to be unconscious, which means that you don't know you're doing it, which means that you're very likely to deny that you're doing it because from your point of view, you can't see that you're doing it. You can't connect all the dots and to see how the actions and thoughts and emotions that you're feeling and all this stuff you're doing, the words you're saying, how all of this is, all the manipulations you're doing, how all that is adding up to creating the corruption in the world. You haven't connected those dots. Why not? Because why would you if all you care about is your survival? See? It doesn't benefit your survival to connect all these dots. Which is, of course, why Actualized.org doesn't benefit your survival. All that Actualized.org is, all these videos are me just connecting dots for you. That's all we're doing here. We're connecting dots. We're connecting dots to create these big pictures of reality. And this is very threatening to your ego and to your way of life. So you might wonder, how is this practical? Well, it's not practical from your point of view. It has a higher transcendent practicality, a practicality beyond practicality. The practicality of escaping needing everything to be practical. There's something beyond that. In fact, you're lost in your own practicality. The problem is not that you're impractical. The problem is that you're too practical. That's your real problem. Of course, you also have problems with being practical. So in truth, you have problems on all sides. You have many problems, not just one problem. See, the mind never sees a problem with its own self-preservation. Unless the mind is very conscious, unless the mind has connected a lot of dots, unless the mind is doing the self-actualization work, then it can start to catch on. But even then, it's still tricky. It's still tricky. I talk about all this stuff as if I'm a master of it, but I have my own corruptions that I deal with every day. It's tricky. I'm susceptible to self-deception. Just because I talk about self-deception doesn't mean I'm immune to self-deception. My critics commonly misunderstand me here. And I've said this in my self-deception series. I said, very importantly, towards the end, that I am absolutely not above self-deception, and neither are you. And that, in fact, is the whole point of talking about self-deception, is to realize that you're not above it, nor will you ever be, not even after you awaken. And it's that vigilance and that humility of recognizing that this is a trap I could always fall into that keeps you out of it. But again, there's no guarantees. You're doing the best you can, but there's no guarantees. So see, this whole corruption issue is really a problem of relativity and perspective. It's very hard to see outside of one's own worldview to assess one's own worldview objectively. It requires awareness of self-bias, which I talked about in my series on self-bias. Go check that out. Very important topic. Most people are totally clueless about self-bias, so therefore they can't evaluate their own worldviews and beliefs objectively. And this gets them into a lot of trouble and ultimately creates corruption. See? Because, see, the problem is if I'm corrupt, I have to be objective enough with my own self to admit to myself that I am corrupt and that I'm somehow doing something wrong and that I need to change. But to admit that I'm wrong in some way or that I've hurt somebody, this is painful. It's painful to admit that because I have a positive self-image that I need to uphold. I have the self-image of being a hero or being a good guy or being a noble guy, being an angel, not being a devil, whatever. So whenever devilry is pointed out to me, it stings, it hurts. You don't want to know that you're a devil. You don't want your mom or your spouse coming to you and pointing out to you how you've been a devil, because then you feel bad. You feel guilty, you feel like you need to change, you feel demonized, you feel people are attacking you, you feel you're not being loved, you feel not being appreciated, which is what you want the most in life. All you want in life is love. So when I call you a devil, you feel attacked. See, you want me to call you an angel. See, but being an angel has to be earned. You can't just call yourself an angel. It can't be in name only. You actually have to be an angel. How do you actually become an angel? Well, that's what all of Actualized.org is telling you how to do. It's hard. You might wonder, why aren't there more angels in the world? Why are there so many devils? So many more devils than angels. Well, when you get deep into this work we're doing, you'll realize, oh, goddamn, this work is so brutal. It's so fucking brutal. It's so hard. It's so emotionally taxing. I feel alone. I feel frustrated. I feel disgusted with myself. I feel insecure. I don't know which way to go. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know where this is going to lead me. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I feel like I'm going insane. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. Yes, these are all the costs of becoming an angel. That is the purification process. See, the devilry is being burned out of you by the light of consciousness, by the light of God. And of course, you don't like that. The devil doesn't like that. It's like pouring salt on a snail. So in order to avoid corruption, you need to have enough awareness of your own worldview to see how your worldview and your survival needs are distorting your perception of reality. I have an old episode called something like being needs versus survival needs, where I talk about that. I'm not sure what I titled that episode. I think that's in the subtitle. Being needs versus survival needs, something like that. Where I go into more depth on that distinction between survival needs and being needs. See, corrupt people aren't conscious of their corruption. That's what is not understood very well. Their mind tricks them into believing that their corruption is actually okay. It hides the corruption through a whole series of mental gymnastics and manipulations of its own self. Through self-deception. Make sure you go watch those 3 episodes on self-deception. Those are, I think, 3 of the most important episodes I've ever released. If you really want to figure out what's going on in life and why human beings behave the way they behave and why you behave the way you behave. It's all explained by self-deception. So the critical element here about corruption is the level of one's consciousness. I've also talked about this in the past, levels of consciousness. Our goal here is to raise your consciousness. And so when you're at a low level of consciousness, it basically guarantees corruption. Because low conscious minds do not see a problem with selfishness, self-bias, manipulation, lying, cheating, moralizing, demonizing others, partisanship. They don't see a problem with this, believe it or not. Because a low consciousness mind isn't conscious enough to spot its own projections, denials, self-biases, and self-deceptions. It doesn't think that it's self-deceived. That's one of the key characteristics of a low consciousness mind. Just to admit that you're thoroughly self-deceived and that your entire perception of reality is distorted by your own mind, just to admit that already takes an individual with a relatively high level of consciousness and sophisticated cognitive development. Don't underestimate this. Don't take this for granted. I would say at least 60% of the entire population of humans on Earth right now in the 21st century are not at a level of consciousness and development, cognitive development, where they can spot their own self-deceptions. And this is the ultimate root cause of a lot of the problems that we have politically, but also individually, and all the corruption you see around us. The average person is easily corrupted by money, power, sex, and fame. Actually, one of the things that saves us from this is that the average person never gets very far in terms of money, power, sex, and fame. And that's actually a good thing. Because when you get a lot of money, power, sex, and fame, but you don't have a foundation of self-actualization and consciousness work on which to in which to ground it, you're gonna do all sorts of evil things. It requires self-actualization work to resist the temptations of money, power, sex, and fame. It takes a person of exceptional integrity, character, values, consciousness, and moral development to be able to do this, which is why it's so rarely done. And here's another really profound insight for you. Corruption gets baked into our culture. It's not that an individual is corrupt per se. That's just the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about something much, much, much deeper here. Corruption is baked into the culture, which includes entertainment, media, the news, art, religion, government, business, the norms of your culture, the education system of your culture, the military, even science as it's done by your culture, the medical system. See, the corruption gets institutionalized in the form of ideology, in the form of ideas, norms, theories, concepts. It's a conceptual framework, really, created by the mind. Whatever industry we're talking about, whether it's the military or science or academia or entertainment or Hollywood or whatever, some religion, there's always an ideology that comes with that system, that's maintaining that system. Like the legal system has a certain ideology to it, certain things that they believe are right and wrong, true and false, delusional and not delusional. See, but where did these ideas come from? Well, they came from past generations. And where do those come from? Well, from other past generations. And so it goes back thousands of years, basically. But this culture is constantly evolving. It's never staying the same. Cultural norms and ideas of what's right and what's wrong, what's corrupt, what's not corrupt, is always changing. And humanity as a whole, we're not staying still. We're also evolving in our consciousness, both individually and collectively. See? So uprooting corruption, it begins with you individually, personally, and we're going to talk more about how to let go of your own personal corruptions. It begins there, but it doesn't just end there. Corruption is also a collective cultural phenomenon. And so the problem here is that the reason most people are so corrupt is because most people are conformist in their thinking. This is spiral dynamic stage blue, but even stage orange is still very conformist, and even stage green is still very conformist in the way that it thinks, in the way that it adopts its ideology and belief systems about reality. And so when you're a conformist, what happens is that you're born into this world and you just accept the prevailing paradigms of your culture. The norms of your culture, you accept them as absolute. You accept them as the way things should be done, the best way that things could be done, with no alternatives. You don't question them existentially. You don't question things from scratch. You don't question your society. You don't question why things are done a certain way. You just follow the rules. And of course, society forces you to conform. As a child, with punishments and rewards. In school, they give you punishments and rewards. So you were basically trained to be a nice lapdog in school, and your parents trained you to be a lapdog and to just accept all sorts of things, including science. They trained you to accept the dogmas of science. Not because they're true, but simply through conformity. And also, you should be careful here to make a distinction between truth and conformity in the sense that just because something is true does not save you from the problem of conforming to it. So you might say, oh, Leo, but something like the earth is round, that's actually true. How do I know it? Yes, through conformity, of course, because I just believe what my teachers told me. But it's not a problem because it's true. No. The problem is not in whether it's true or not. The problem lies in the fact that you're conforming just for the sake of conforming. You see, the problem is that you didn't derive the truth for yourself. That's what really matters here. So we're not really interested in what's true or not. We're interested in how you got there. And if you got there through conformity, that's a problem. It's your process which is corrupt. We're interested in the meta dynamics here of how your mind works. We're interested in the process of it. And the process you're doing, the epistemology you're using is very, very corrupt and very, very naive and takes so much for granted. So when 90%, over 90% of the world's population is simply learning through conformity and then entering all these different industries and sectors of society like art, media, entertainment, news, culture, education, military, science, all this, they're entering into it and then they're reinforcing that system. That system brainwashed these people, and then these people become what? They become the next generation of those who support the system. So some university professor, first he spends 30 years being brainwashed by the university system and the school system, which feeds the university system. And then after 30 years of that, then he becomes a professor and he continues to do the very same thing. And of course, he doesn't recognize that he's doing it. And so in this way, conformist people like sheep, they become vectors for corruption. Corruption here is like a virus, infects your mind. See, if you want to inoculate your mind against corruption, then you have to start to think independently for yourself, from scratch. Question things existentially. Don't take anything for granted. Don't believe anyone, including me. And then most people, because they just assume that the cultural programming they get is good, and in fact, often it's the greatest in the world. Americans are the greatest, or the Japanese are the greatest, or the Indians are the greatest. This is nationalism, basically. Once you're programmed with that, you become so loyal to your culture. This is, again, Spiraldynamic Sage Blue is really good at this. Loyalty to one's culture. That then what happens is that then they go into denial mode about the corruption of the culture. Because when first you make a loyalty oath to your culture, and you're going to support your culture and defend your culture at all costs, see, now it's about defending your culture, something you're attached to, something you're identified with, rather than the truth. Because what happens when your culture is corrupt and the truth conflicts with that? What happens? Is this type of person going to admit that the culture is corrupt? Of course not, because his loyalty is to the culture, not to the truth. He's not being objective, he's being self-biased here. And so, of course, he's going to deny the corruption. And in fact, he's going to blame you. He's going to blame the truth for being falsehood. He's going to call what's true false. And he's going to call you, as the person who shows it to him, as a devil, when in fact it's he who's being a devil by being attached to his culture. See? It's not just religious fanatics that do this. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about your family. I'm talking about your friends. I'm talking about your colleagues, your coworkers, Everybody you know is doing this, including you, unless you've done a lot of work to escape it. And even then, it's very hard to escape. It's like escaping a black hole. It's got you real deep. You've been brainwashed since you were age 0, right? So keep that in mind. And I'll just give you one example here with science. It might sound here like I'm talking about some religious fundamentalist or some sort of cult. By the way, check out my 2-part series on cult psychology, where I do talk about a lot of this kind of stuff. And also check out my episode on how ideology works, where I talk a lot about this kind of stuff. But back to the point, people think that, this is only fundamentalist religious people that Leo is ranting against. No. Science is guilty of this. Modern science is deeply corrupt. But the scientists and academics who are part of the system are in denial about the corruption. And when you tell them, hey, your institution is deeply corrupt, they say, what are you talking about? Where's the corruption? There's no corruption. You're crazy. Because they never question the system that raised them, that created them. They're a part of that system. Their survival is hinged to that system. You think some university professor who has devoted 40, 50 years of his life working his ass off, taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans that he's probably going to be paying off until he retires, you think he's going to admit that the system that he's hitched himself to is corrupt? Not a chance. Not a chance. He might admit it on the surface, but he's never going to admit the deep corruption of the whole system. See? And actually, to admit corruption on the surface is a clever ploy the devil plays. It's part of the corruption. See, there's layers to this deception. So one of the ways that you can avoid admitting your own corruption is you can say, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, Leo, I know we're corrupt. I know science isn't perfect. Leo, of course, scientists make mistakes. Some academics are bad sometimes. Sure, of course, some academics even make up, studies, and they make up their results. There are some rotten apples in the batch. But Leo, we'll get rid of those rotten apples. Science corrects itself and blah, 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 blah. This whole spiel, this is the ideology I'm talking about. This is the corruption. This is a disguise for the deeper, fundamental, metaphysical corruption, the paradigmatic corruption which infects science and academia. Which I can't go into here. It's a very deep topic. I've touched on it in the past, and I'll have separate episodes that go deep on that. That's a very deep issue. But the problem is that every time I bring this up, anytime I bring up the corruptions of science, I'm always accused of being anti-science. Of course, that's precisely how corruption maintains itself. The whistleblower or the reformer, the one who's pointing out the devilry, will be the one who himself gets called the devil, because the devil that is being pointed out needs to project the devilry back out, you see, in order to deny his devilry. Which, of course, is survival. So the funny irony is that those people who accuse me of being anti-science are actually just projecting that on me. You see, I'm very pro-science. I want to remove all the corruptions of science so that science can be in its full glorious form. Right now, what we call science in the 21st century, this is really barbarism. This is like the equivalent of bloodletting with leeches that used to exist in the medical field, 1,000 years ago in the medieval times. So, this is still, our science is extremely crude in its understanding and thinking about reality. And so one of my missions is to help to correct that about science. But of course, I understand this is a very tricky mission, because, see, scientists, they're such a clever fucking bunch. As soon as you start to question various metaphysical and epistemic foundations of science, they get all clever on you, and they start to play the skeptic, and they start to say, oh, but where's your proof? And where's this? And where's that? Where's your studies? Where's your double-blind, placebo-controlled, and all this shit? Again, all that shit they were programmed with, when they were learning what science was, that is the corruption that needs to be cured. That, which has never been questioned. It's the very epistemic foundations of science that were never questioned and always taken for granted by these scientists, that's what needs to be questioned. But when it's questioned, of course, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy effect, because they're stuck in that paradigm, either they have to admit that their paradigm is wrong or they have to attack me. So of course they're going to attack the messenger. And this is a classic problem with corruption. Not, of course, just science. Let's broaden this out now to include all the different domains of life. It's well known throughout history, especially in politics and in government, that people who call out corruption get demonized and often killed. Why is that? You would think, if you were thinking about this naively, you would say, well, but if, for example, if some American in the military, let's say a soldier who is, responsible for some war that America is going to wage overseas in the Middle East, if this soldier comes forward because he sees some corruption in the military, in his squad, and he sees that people there, that they're raping and abusing others, and maybe that they're killing prisoners they shouldn't be killing, that they're doing torture and whatever other despicable and illegal things, if he comes forward and reveals that, you would think like, well, the military would love him for that. He should get rewarded for that because he's helping the military to improve itself by pointing out the bad parts of it. But of course, what actually happens? Exactly the opposite. The military hates him for that. He's considered a traitor. He's demonized. He's tarred and feathered. He's court-martialed. He's put on trial. He's put in jail. Maybe he's even killed. In today's age, we don't kill that many people through the legal system. But in old times, 500 years ago, for that kind of thing, you would just be shot in the head. Or even worse, not only would you be given a quick death, you would actually be tortured for that. The Spanish Inquisition, what was that about? That was about rooting out heretics. Those so-called heretics, what were they? They weren't just bad-mouthing religion because they hated Christianity. No. Oftentimes, they were reformers. They were people who were pointing out, hey, this part of your church is corrupt. You guys are taking money that you shouldn't be taking. And oftentimes, the people who were called heretics were actually Christians. It's not like they were some evil atheists. They were often more Christian than the ones who they were criticizing and the ones who were calling them heretics. In fact, that is the whole point of the Inquisition. See? The Inquisition presents itself as though it's rooting out the corruption in the Catholic Church. That's from the Inquisitor's point of view, the point of view of those in power of the church. But then the one that the Inquisition is focused against, he could also be a good Christian. He could be a better Christian. And he could be pointing out the corruptions of those bishops and cardinals and popes and whoever else is in charge. He could be saying things like, like what Martin Luther was saying, like, you guys are so corrupt, you're taking money. Religion has become all about, going to church and giving donations and receiving favors. And it's like the connection to God and to Christ has been lost by all this materialism. And of course, for this, you will easily get tortured for this kind of stuff. Maybe not today, but that's how it was in the past. And you find this all across the board. This isn't just a problem with the Catholic Church. This is a problem. And of course, the Catholic Church has this problem even today, for example, with the pedophilia problem that they have. They're notorious at hiding it. You would think, like, why wouldn't the higher-ups in the Catholic Church want to shine light on the problem and expose all the corrupt pedophile priests and preachers in the church? Because this would be good. This would be a cleansing of the church. Then the Catholic Church maybe could regain its good name. But of course, that's precisely what they don't want, because they would then have to accept that this beautiful church that they have identified with, that they think is all good, and they think it is some divine, vehicle for God amongst mortals, they will have to admit that this was actually a tool of the devil. How are you going to admit it? Imagine that you grew up since a little child. Your whole life you've been taught about the importance of Christ and spreading Christ's word and doing good thing and doing good works and being loving like Christ and doing all of this, and that you're part of this institution, the Catholic Church, which is so good and it's doing such good things around the world, and it's got billions of people and all this. And imagine spending 30 years in that ideology and then having to admit that actually what that leads to is some serious devilry. That would be enormously emotionally painful for you. It would not be part of your survival agenda to admit that, you see. And if you don't understand all these complicated and sneaky dynamics that I'm talking about, because the Catholic Church doesn't really teach you how your mind works. In fact, they just brainwash you some more. And so what? How are you going to figure this out? You're completely lost inside your own mind. You're so identified with the church, you're going to want to defend that church. And in this way, the devil co-opts all religions. But of course, not just religions. Science, academia, the education system, the media, the news, the entertainment system, the government, the military, business. Yeah. If you are a whistleblower in a business, what's going to happen to you? They won't torture you. They probably won't kill you, at least not nowadays. But they will fire you. They will make it difficult for you to get a job in the industry. That's pretty damn sure. See? Whistleblowers and reformers are treated as the enemy from the point of view of those against whom they're whistleblowing. Why? Because the people that the whistleblowers are whistleblowing against are already corrupt. For them to be corrupt means they had to be extremely selfish to begin with, which means they had to be extremely self-biased, which means their mind had to distort reality, which means that now when that highly self-biased, self-deceived, distorted mind looks at the whistleblower, what it sees in the whistleblower is not somebody who's doing good by reforming the system. It sees a devil. That is the very projection of the devil who did the corruption onto the angel who's pointing out the devilry. See how twisted this gets? A corrupt mind will project its own corruption onto those who seek to clean up the corruption. So if I stand up and I start to point out all the legitimate limitations and problems with the paradigm of science, for example, I will be denounced and demonized and attacked by the most reputable scientists. Of course, it must work this way. Because if they were conscious enough not to do this, not to project on me, they would already be conscious enough to realize those things that I'm trying to point out. The reason I need to point them out is precisely because the people I'm pointing them out to can't see it. It's a problem of can't see it, can't see it, can't see it. That's what the whole awareness and consciousness raising is all about. It's helping you to see things you couldn't have otherwise seen. A devil hates it when his devilry is called out by its name, because what a devil needs to do in order to be an effective devil is he needs to act like what he's doing is not devilry, but that it's good. And so he convinces himself and he convinces everyone around him. He creates an ideology where collectively we come together as humans. We create an ideology that, hey, what we're doing is good. Like if you go inside the corporate culture of ExxonMobil, what is their attitude towards global warming inside the upper management of ExxonMobil? They've created over the last 50 years in order to survive as a company. because they couldn't exist unless they did this. They had to create an ideology, a collective corporate culture had to be created specifically tailored to the needs of ExxonMobil, which explains away the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution and all this and the oil spills and how this is destroying the environment. Explains all that away as, oh, well, they have a whole list of explanations. These have been so ingrained or so absorbed, let's say, it's a better word, this ideology has been so absorbed by the people who work in that organization that it's not even recognized by them. It's not that they sat down one day, some evil CEO sat down and he said, okay, here's a bullet-pointed list of all the things that we're going to say in order to trick ourselves into believing that we're not hurting the environment and other human beings. He never sat down and said that. His mind did it for him automatically. This is just what it means to be a human. This is what it means to survive. If your mind didn't do this, you'd be dead a long time ago. All right? So you're really good at doing this. You're so good at doing this, you don't know you're doing it. Such that the CEO of ExxonMobil could be sitting here listening to this episode right now. I could be speaking directly to you. And I could be explaining all of this, and you could be sitting there nodding your head and agreeing with all of it. And you can say, yes, 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 Leo, I want to reform society. There's so much corruption in the world, all this, but you will still not admit your own corruption and the role that you play. You will just skip over that. Conveniently, your mind will just excuse it away. Even though I could call you out by name, your mind will still skip over this part. The last 5 minutes I've been talking, your mind will just erase all that, and you will just agree with everything else I said and keep doing the devilry you've been doing. Because that's what you need to do in order to keep working in that company. Because if you really understood what I'm talking about here and you really understood the role that you play there, you'd have to quit. How would you feed your kids after that? How would you live with yourself? See? Very tricky stuff. Here's another key insight for you. Trying to defend against corruption creates corruption. This is very counterintuitive, and this is one of the cleverest tricks that the devil plays. See, the devil is all about trickery. It's trickery within trickery within trickery. See, you unravel one trick and you think you're done, but actually that trick was wrapped inside of another trick, which is wrapped inside of a third trick. So you got to do a lot of unraveling to really unravel the whole thing. And of course, this is the illusion of reality that we're ultimately going to unravel here. But let's not get there yet. Let's start with the simpler stuff. So, for example, trying to protect a religious doctrine, a rigorous doctrine. Let's say you're very orthodox. Why are Orthodox people so orthodox? It's under the pretense that they're being orthodox because they want to protect the purity of that original strain of teaching. So if you get some Orthodox Jew and you ask him, why are you so serious and so orthodox about your Judaism? Inevitably, what he's going to tell you in one way or another is he's going to give you some sort of story about how it all goes back to the original source, like Moses or I don't know who he would cite, the original Abraham or whatever, the original source, and that his orthodoxy somehow he's going to trace his lineage back to Moses, to Abraham, to Adam and Eve, whatever. And he's going to say, well, see, I'm so orthodox and so strict with my religious doctrines. I follow the rules so religiously. I pray exactly how I need to pray. I do exactly what the book says I need to do. I go and observe all the holidays that I need to observe and all this. I'm super orthodox because I don't want my religion to get corrupted. But you see, that itself is already the corruption. Because what you're doing is you're practicing spirituality in a formalized, mechanical manner through conformity. You didn't actually derive and develop any of these rituals or holidays or prayer techniques. You didn't create them. Where do they come from? You blindly accepted them through indoctrination in your upbringing. That's the truth of it, if you're honest. It takes a lot of honesty just to admit that, what I just said there. And so you're highly partial to them. And so part of the conformity and the ideology that you have is that your ideology is not an ideology, but that it's actually going back to some deep original truth, and that by being strict and mechanical in how you observe these principles and rituals and so forth, following the Ten Commandments and all that, that by doing this, you're being somehow spiritual. But you're not. You're being the opposite of spiritual. You're being a devil. You think you're preventing corruption of your religion by observing these things rigorously. No. These very things that you're accepting now through conformity, all these rituals and rules and commandments and so forth, these are already highly corrupt. These have been corrupted by the devil thousands of years ago. But see, the devil loves nothing more than a conformist mind, because what the devil can do then is he can just write a new rule and then justify it as being somehow linked to the original chain, going back to the source, and then he knows that you will just conform to it and you'll just do it mechanically and blindly. And there, the devil wins. So this is the case not in Judaism only, but in Islam, in Christianity and Buddhism and elsewhere. Even in yoga. Like, I was arguing with, I already said this story once, but this story is pertinent to this episode even more so. I was arguing with one guy on my forum about Sadhguru's teachings, and he was telling me how he's a loyal follower of Sadhguru. You know, Sadhguru is his guru, the YouTube guru. And I mean, Sadhguru's great. I don't have any problems with him per se. But he was telling me about how, well, you know, Sadhguru's system is the perfect system. It's never going to get corrupted because he's so enlightened and he's so conscious. And he makes all of his students memorize his teachings and teach them word for word to other students. And in this way, it ensures that the teachings will stay pure for 1,000 years. No, this very process is the thing that makes it corrupt. It's going to turn into another religion, which is going to turn into all sorts of abuses and devilry. Because the key that distinguishes consciousness from devilry is that consciousness is not mechanical. Consciousness is independent. Consciousness is its own authority. Consciousness is not looking to some external authority figure. Consciousness recognizes that the only authority figure is oneself. Because, of course, you're God here. You are the ultimate authority. Check out my episode, How Authority Works, which really will mindfuck you about that point there. I won't go into it further here. So yeah, anytime you're looking for an external authority figure to tell you how to practice your religion, you've already gone wrong. You've already corrupted it. Same thing with scientists. A lot of people who fancy themselves scientifically minded, defenders of rationality and so forth, they get very rigorous and strict with their rationality, so much so that their mind actually constricts and distorts reality. What it doesn't occur to them is that by becoming more rigorous and strict with your science, actually your science misses out on too much. You see, science is like a filter, almost like an antivirus, you might say. And science erects this firewall against false beliefs and false theories and doctrines getting incorporated into science. There's a very strong firewall within science. But of course, you know how that works in practice with your computer. When you erect a really strong firewall on your computer, it doesn't let you install a lot of good stuff that's important for you to install. In fact, most antivirus software gives you so many false positives or false negatives, whatever they're called, is that you spend more time fighting with the firewall on your virus and on your antivirus than you ever get viruses. Viruses are rare compared to the problems you get by installing an antivirus, which then doesn't let you install all the software and all the other stuff that is good. There's no problem with it that you need to install, but it doesn't let you do it. See, this is the problem with science when you get very rigorous and very rational. You get so rational you forget that rationality is a tiny subset of reality. See? And this so this is one commonality, an interesting commonality between the way religions try to protect against corruption and how science tries to protect against corruption, but how in the very act of trying to protect against corruption, they actually create the very corruption that they were hoping to avoid. And so in this way, of course, it's completely obvious that Sadhguru's teachings will be corrupted, as have all religions been, and science and institutions and all this. See? Because you're not thinking independently. It's a game of telephone that you're playing, where one generation of people tells another generation of people what to believe, and you just believe it. But in every subsequent generation, you're making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. That telephone game, and every step it gets corrupted a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, until 1,000 years pass, and then what you have is you have the Spanish Inquisition, or you have the pedophile priests of today, or you have some government corruption, or you have some legal system corruption, or whatever. Corruption cannot be prevented mechanically. Corruption is mechanicalness. Mechanicalness is lack of consciousness. Corruption is lack of consciousness. If you want to solve corruption, that requires consciousness, which means you can't follow any simple formula. You have to think for yourself. Maya is another name for the force that creates corruption. Maya is the intelligent, deceptive force of nature, or what we call the devil, what I call the devil. Ego co-opts universal intelligence for personal gain. What you're actually doing as an ego self, as a human, is that you're tapping into God's infinite intelligence to be able to live your life. To do science, to do religion, to rationalize, to think, to imagine things, you're tapping into infinite intelligence. But you're tapping into such a tiny portion of it, and you're twisting and distorting it based on your fears and your limited conceptions of reality, because your perspective is so limited and myopic. You see so little of it that you're actually being very, very stupid and unintelligent. But you think you're being intelligent. Of course, it's relative. You're intelligent relative to an ant, but you're very unintelligent relative to universal intelligence, relative to God. So you're somewhere in the middle there, probably closer to the bottom than towards the top. And so the more conscious you become, the more fear you let go, the more your sense of self expands, the more you tap into universal intelligence, and you do so less for personal gain and more for the dissemination of consciousness and love. And my claim is that if you were infinitely intelligent, you would only use your intelligence for spreading love and nothing else. Not for personal gain, not for any selfishness. But of course, most people have no idea what that even means. They have no idea what infinite intelligence is. For that, go check out my episode, What is Intelligence?, where I explain that. So, corruption creates more corruption. Corruption makes corruption easier. Once an institution has been corrupted, that institution then infects very easily other minds. So one of the key tricks that the devil uses is the trick of corrupting the highest, most credible institutions. So if the devil can corrupt the institution of science, if the devil can corrupt Harvard and Princeton and Yale and MIT, that's what he wants to corrupt. If the devil wants to corrupt Christianity and Buddhism, that's perfect. That's the perfect target for the devil. If the devil wants to corrupt a holy man, a priest, perfect. Because see, nobody suspects that a priest would be corrupt. Nobody suspects that a priest would be bold enough to molest a child. Nobody suspects that a priest who preaches about the evils of homosexuality would himself be a homosexual or have homosexual desires. Of course. Nobody would suspect that a scientist with 5 Nobel Prizes Well, I don't think such scientists exist, but they're lucky to get one. A scientist with even one Nobel Prize and a bunch of other credentials. Nobody suspects, nobody questions whether they understand reality. So that's perfect. The devil will spread deception through that scientist, through authority figures, because it can disseminate downwards very easily, and it has enormous scale. You see, you only need to corrupt a few top key officials in the government, or in a church, or in a spiritual group, or in a scientific field, to then corrupt millions of people down below, because it's the trickle-down effect. Here, it's actually real. The trickle-down theory of corruption actually works. It's like a virus. So you see, the devil's not stupid. The devil is harnessing universal intelligence for the purpose of spreading corruption, of spreading selfishness. Because the devil needs to create an environment of corruption around himself. The devil can't survive in a sterile environment of light and love. The devil needs an environment of selfishness, of fear-mongering, of anger and bitterness and low consciousness. So he needs to create that environment. So not only is he miserable, he needs to make everyone around him miserable to do this. The rule of thumb is that those who make a big show of fighting corruption outwardly are actually likely to be very corrupt themselves inwardly. Their show that they're putting on is a front. That's how the devil works. The devil creates fronts and facades and masks and all this. This is how trickery works. So the trap here is fighting corruption outwardly. Instead, you need to be much more concerned about fighting corruption inwardly. This is the difference I've talked about in the past of the lesser jihad versus the greater jihad. The greater jihad is the inner journey towards conquering one's own corruption and egotism. The lesser jihad is fighting out there against one's enemies, the infidels who you think are corrupt. So this is, again, speaking of religions, Islam has become very corrupt over the last 1,500 years, precisely because it's so conformist in the way that people learn that religion. And it's gotten so twisted up that the greater jihad has been replaced by the lesser jihad of fighting infidels in the world somewhere, fighting Westerners from the Middle Eastern perspective. This is not what Islam is about. What Islam is about is the inner journey of curing your own devilry. That's what Islam is about. Surrendering, literally, Islam means surrender. To surrender one's own devilry. And look what it's turned into for most people. Exactly the opposite. See? So I'm not picking on any one institution or group. I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to, be an equal opportunity offender here. Offend everybody. The scientists and the religious people, everybody's offended now. And everybody hates me for pointing all this out. Of course. Which is why it's rarely pointed out. Because the people who point it out do it at great consequence to themselves. So why should they risk their own neck to point this stuff out? And you don't want to hear it. See? So why should I be telling you all of this against your own will? If you aren't interested in identifying and removing your own corruption, why should I be more interested in your corruption than you are? You see how backwards that is? See? It's the scientists who should be more worried about the errors of science than I am, and yet they're not. It's the military people who should be more worried about the evils of what the military is doing than its citizens are, but of course they don't. It's the politicians who should be most worried about corruption, but of course they're the least worried about it. Everything is opposite. Everything is upside down in the world of the devil. Integrity is key for dealing with corruption, except there's a problem. The devil plays a trick here too. There's a very big difference between actual integrity and integrity as a show, as a front, or as an ideology. For example, many religious people, Christians especially, put up the front of having high integrity, but actually it's totally just ideology. It's words. It's sweet words when what really matters is your level of consciousness and development. It doesn't matter what your ideals are. You can have the highest ideals about being the most godly person. You can believe in Christ and the teachings of the Buddha or whatever else, and none of that matters, because what dictates how you actually show up in the world and whether you're going to be corrupt or not is, do you have enough consciousness? Is your consciousness high enough? Are you at a certain high level of cognitive and moral development? If you're not, it doesn't matter what you believe. In fact, the more you believe that you're doing good, the more of a devil you'll become. This is why priests and religions become so corrupt, because it just becomes a philosophy, empty words, ideas, nice theories about, turning the other cheek and all that, and helping the poor. But then in practice, do modern evangelicals help the fucking poor? They don't give a fuck about the poor, politically speaking, because they vote for right-wing conservatives who don't give a fuck about the poor, who would cut welfare programs like that if there wasn't a popular uprising against it. See? Really, if the evangelicals weren't corrupt, they would be the most liberal and the most Democrat voters. And of course, do evangelicals want to hear that? Do they want to admit that? Of course not. They will deny this till the day they die, what I just said. They will accuse me of being a partisan hack, of hating the Republicans, of being unfair, of being biased. They will project all that onto me just to deny what I said there. Because religion, conformist organized religion, loves to project that image of purity. That is a front to keep them from actually questioning the conformity of their mind and raising their level of cognitive development and really purifying the devil from within themselves. See, that's how the devil operates. He cloaks himself in the image of God, but it's just an image. It's an illusion. It ain't the real deal. There's a big difference between talking about God and being conscious of God. That difference is lost not only on religious people, but also on scientific, atheistic, materialistic people too. They both make a dangerous conflation of those two. Corruption operates on untruth, manipulation, lack of spiritual connection, lack of love, lack of perspective, righteousness, denial, projection, fear, and attachment. Materialism, lower chakra drives for higher power, for sex, money, laziness, gluttony, cronyism. The more you're run by your lower chakras, the more corrupt you are. Which brings us to another important point, which is, what is the relationship between spiral dynamics and corruption? The lower your stage on the spiral, by the way, if you don't know what that means, spiral dynamics, check out my multi-part series on spiral dynamics. The lower your spiral stage, the more corrupt you are. That's the rule of thumb. Why is this so? Because these stages correspond to levels of consciousness and moral and cognitive development, values development. And the higher one goes up these stages, the larger one's sense of self. The lower one is on these stages, the lower one's the more limited and more contracted one's sense of self. So a person with a very contracted, limited sense of self cannot be conscious of their self-biases. And so, of course, they're going to be corrupt, and they're going to be very conformist in their thinking. They're going to be very, very ideological. And this ideology is one of the primary vectors for devilry. It's really when you get to tier 2, stages yellow and turquoise, that corruption gets eliminated. I mean, it can still exist in corners and pockets, but you really need to get to tier 2. Because remember, tier 1, spiral dynamics tier 1, which is stages blue, orange, green, and those three and some even lower ones, that is tier 1, and tier 1 is all about meeting your basic survival needs. And tier 2, that shift from green to yellow and above, that's when you're going beyond survival needs and you're getting to being needs. What Abraham Maslow called being needs. And it's only there that you're detached enough from your identity and from your own ideologies and from your own self-deceptions and thinking and distorted perspectives of the world and from your own personal needs for love and gratification and money and all that. You're detached enough to see your own self and your own worldview objectively, and therefore you're able to eradicate your own corruption. It's still difficult, but you're able to do it. Whereas really in tier 1, you're not able to do it. You're too self-involved. You're too scared and too worried about your own personal agenda to care about eliminating your own corruption. But you will make a show of demonizing other corrupt people. You will do that. That's a very convenient red herring, because every time you're judging other politicians on TV for being corrupt, that's a very good distraction from ever discovering your own corruptions. That's the lesser jihad. The biggest obstacle for third world, so-called third world and underdeveloped countries, like in Africa, in South America, parts of Asia and so forth, Russia, Eastern Europe, their biggest obstacle is corruption. Those countries could be so much better if only everybody was willing to cooperate and not act like a selfish, barbaric animal and manipulate the whole system to their own advantage. Damn the collateral damage. But of course, they can't do that precisely because they're so stuck on survival. It's a dog-eat-dog world there in these third world countries. There's limited resources to go around. It's a real problem. It's not a fake problem. In certain countries that I was talking about, in Africa and elsewhere, in South America, they literally don't have enough food for the children. So of course it's going to be a dog-eat-dog situation, and it's going to be extremely corrupt because your life depends on it. That's my point. I'm not saying corruption is some frivolous thing that you can just easily wish away. I'm saying that the reason corruption has existed for 10,000 years and will probably continue to exist for another 10,000 years at least in human societies is because of how deeply wedded this is to your life. We're talking about life and death here. And the ideas and ideologies you hold are directly related to your ability to live and to meet your basic needs like food, shelter, sex, love, approval, companionship, friendship, all that stuff that a human needs or thinks he needs. That's what corruption is serving. So in these third world countries, vested interests are resisting development, slowing down the process. Slowing down the process of expanding love and consciousness. But they can't stop it entirely because the devil always loses in the long run. The devil could only slow down the process. So that's what's happening. Slowly, these countries are becoming less and less corrupt, but it takes generations for this to be noticeable. And of course, just because I'm explicitly pointing out third world countries here, I'm not by any means saying that first world countries like America or in Europe are not corrupt. We have plenty of corruption. I'll get to that in a minute. There's actually, I've posted on my blog in the past, a corruption index. There's websites that actually rank, a nonprofit, nonpartisan website that will rank the corruption of every single country in the world, and they track this over decades. They track what is happening. It's a score from 0 to 100. 0 means totally corrupt. You can barely live there. 100 means totally pure, no corruption at all. This includes the court systems, the political system, the police, the military, all this. So they rank this, and you see this map. It's a really illuminating map because this corruption index is one of the most important indices to track for a nation's development and growth, not the GDP. Corruption index. Because this corruption index directly correlates to the collective consciousness of that society. What you see is that countries that are below 50, these are not countries you want to live. These are very problematic countries with a lot of violence, a lot of selfishness. It's hard to do spirituality there. These countries are extremely dogmatic, very conformist. They all buy into some form of nationalism or some religion. These are devil countries, you might say. Of course, a lot of countries in the Middle East, a lot of countries in Africa are at this level, countries in South America and in parts of Asia and Eastern Europe as well. And then you have countries that are above 50. Those tend to be clustered in Europe. Some of the highest countries are in Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries. Of course, America, Canada are pretty good. Mexico's pretty bad. From what I'm recalling this from memory. Japan is pretty good. Yeah, you can go find that on my blog. Maybe I'll link to it again. That's an illuminating map. And that map basically tells you the level of consciousness of every country in the world. And, one of the things that'll surprise you is America is not the top on that list, which shows you we have more work to do. This is really what politics is about. In my series on conscious politics, that 4-part series, long as hell, this is one of the core pillars of what conscious politics is. It's the raising of the consciousness and the identity of a collective society to reduce or to raise the consciousness index, the corruption index, to get it closer to 100, so that there's little corruption. See, in very corrupt countries that are under 50 on this index, it's hard to do any self-actualization work there. It's hard to grow. It's hard to start a business because these countries are so corrupt. To start a business, you already need to pay thousands of dollars in bribes. Otherwise, they won't even let you start a business, or they'll extort you. You could start a business, but then some mafia guy will come to you and he'll say, "Hey, that's a mighty fine business you got there. Looks like you're earning $5,000 a month. It would be a shame if something happened to your business. Why don't you pay me $2,000 a month and I'll let you keep the other 3. Otherwise, I know where your mother lives and I got a baseball bat." See, that's how business is conducted in most of the world, actually. Most of the world. It's amazing because if you grew up in a first world country like America or in Europe, you're extremely lucky. First of all, be grateful for how lucky you are, but also you have no idea what it's like to live in a third world country. Like no idea what it's like to live there, to do business there. See, it's not. Yeah, you can travel. Sure, you could travel to Africa. You could travel to South America. You could be there for a few weeks. Stay in a nice hotel. Your money is worth 100 times more than the people who earn the money locally there, so you can afford to stay in a nice hotel and eat at nice restaurants, and it still feels very cheap to you, and all this. And so you only see the good sides of those countries. You don't see like the ghettos. You don't see the political corruption. You don't see the court system. You don't see the police system unless you do. And if you do, it can be quite a culture shock. That's one of the values of travel, especially to non-touristy places around the world, third world kind of underdeveloped countries, is that you get to see just how radically barbaric most of the world still is. We're insulated from it here in America to a large extent, although of course we have pockets of it here too. We have our own ghettos and inner cities and stuff, so I'm not discounting that. But man, like it can get really ugly in some of these countries. I also posted a video on my blog. Somebody actually linked it on the forum, and then I reposted on my blog about Liberia. Oh man, you want to see one of the most corrupt countries in the world? Liberia in Africa. Fuck, the shit that goes on there will make your skin crawl. That's like, you can't even write that stuff. That stuff is more horrific than a horror movie. That's real corruption. Go watch that to really appreciate that. And then contemplate how, if I was a political leader in Liberia, how would I help my country to evolve? You see how crippling the problem of corruption is. It's this twisted catch-22 where the people are in such desperate straits. They're so desperate to survive. They can barely buy enough food to support their children. They don't have time to go to school. They don't have time to read books. They can't afford a book. There's no bookstores. They don't have internet. They can't watch actualized videos. Like, they're literally sucking cock in a whorehouse for 12 hours a day just to make ends meet. They're sucking cock. That's their reality. And now you try to think, okay, how do I introduce some of these actualized concepts that we talk about? How do I introduce that to a mother who works 12 hours in a horse house sucking cock? And then you see how difficult it is. And even if some good leader or politician stood up, what would happen to him? He would be killed instantly. See? Selfishness kills selflessness. But even though that's true, selflessness is still stronger, because in the end, selflessness is actually immortal, whereas selfishness is temporary and impermanent. See, one of the benefits of being God is that you're totally formless. You can't be killed. You're so selfless, it doesn't matter to you if somebody kills you. And that's the whole point of spirituality. The whole point of spirituality and mysticism and religion, ultimately, if you want to boil it down to its core kernel, is that you become so conscious and so selfless that it doesn't matter to you if somebody killed you. And this makes you invincible. And then from there, you can effect real change. And if someone kills you, like they did with Gandhi or MLK, you're okay with it. That's real power. That's what inspires people to follow you. That's what pushes society forward, that kind of leadership. Of course, that kind of leadership is very rare. It can't be faked. This is the most honest of signals. You can't fake this kind of leadership. You can only do this kind of leadership if you're very, very pure and selfless. Not as an ideal, but actually. This is very hard to pull off. You would need to actualize all the stuff that I talk about and even more to pull this off. No community can run without a deep understanding of how corruption works. This topic is crucial to any kind of community building. I don't care if you're a politician or not. It doesn't matter if you're not a politician. You might say, oh, Leo, well, you're just talking about this for people who want to be politicians or something, or big corporate CEOs, but I'm never going to be that, so I don't need to know about this. You still need to know about this because, first of all, you're a citizen of your country and you vote. And it's important that you be able to recognize what corruption looks like versus what it doesn't. People have a problem with that. That's number one. Number two is that you're still part of various organizations at work and so forth. Even like, for example, I'm no politician or anything, but just in the last 4 years that I've been running my forum, it's almost been 4 years since I started the Actualized forum. It's been a very interesting and educational experience for me because I've had to deal with various community dynamics that I don't usually deal with, like organizing a community, maintaining a community, dealing with corrupt people, because we do get people in there who come in there who are spammers or who want to promote some sort of toxic racist ideology or whatever. We have to kick them out, but we have to be careful in how we kick them out, because if we're too aggressive about it, then we accidentally get some false positives and whatever, and we step on the toes of members who are not doing anything wrong, and then they get upset and all this. So it's very tricky. It's the problem basically of policing. How do you police without being overbearing with your policing? That's very difficult to do, and society has always dealt with this problem. Every community has dealt with this problem since the dawn of time, and we're dealing with it today. China's dealing with it right now in Hong Kong. They're dealing with the problem of how do we police the stuff in Hong Kong without being too vicious about it. But at the same time, we can't just let rioters run around, vandalizing the city without any kind of policing. So that's an extremely difficult balance. We see the same kind of balance, for example, in social media. There's been a lot of corruption over the last few years with political manipulation and various kinds of ads on Facebook and on YouTube and elsewhere online. A lot of proliferation of fake news and all sorts of ideology, devilry. basically the devil is expanding into the digital domain, into the social media domain. You know, this is a ripe new field for the devil. The devil has only known about social media for maybe 5 or 10 years. You know, he's just catching on. He's kind of late to the party. The devil has learned how to use Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and all this. And so it's still fresh. You know, the devil is still figuring out how to manipulate all this stuff. And so yeah, corruption is always expanding into new fields. And, you know, what we're seeing with these social media companies like Facebook, they're also dealing with this issue. How do they police devils without being overbearing with their policing? Same problem on YouTube. You know, how do they eliminate the the terrorist videos and other kinds of bad content and various kinds of right-wing ideologies and white nationalist stuff and well, I mean, I guess just homophobic stuff, anti-gay stuff. How do they police this without being too draconian about it? That's an extremely difficult balance. Both sides will criticize YouTube or Facebook or whoever else, or China. Both sides, you know, they can't win that. They're damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they over-police, they're criticized. If they under-police, they criticize. It's very difficult to strike that balance. And I've felt that in running my forum. I've experienced that. You know, sometimes I've over-policed, sometimes I've under-policed. And it's very tricky. People don't appreciate how that works. This is what it means to run a community or a society. Communities can involve billions of people, like in China, or they can involve 10 people. They could even involve just 4 people in your family. So this topic is extremely important. This topic of corruption is extremely important for leaders, because almost by definition, if you're a leader, you're going to have some sort of, at least a little community that you're leading, if not a big one. And the more of a leader you become, the more you're going to have to deal with these policing issues and with corruption. Your own corruption, but then others peer pressuring you into being corrupt yourself. You see, the problem is that when you're a high consciousness visionary leader and you're trying to lead others out of their low consciousness and into love and into truth, you would think that this would be, easy, but this is the hardest thing, because the very people you're trying to lead can't appreciate the pearls that you're giving them. And so what ends up happening is that if the leader is too high above the rabble of the mob he's trying to lead, they come for him with pitchforks and they kill him. See, this is the ultimate limiting bottleneck of the rate at which a community or society can evolve. It can only evolve as fast as the masses, the sheep, the conformist sheep, which comprise like 80 to 90% of the community, are willing to accept what the visionary leaders are disseminating down. And usually they can't accept too much. They can only accept maybe, 20% above where they are, 30%, 50%. After a leader becomes too conscious and too loving and too good relative to the mass that he's leading, they will actually turn on him and kill him, or exile him or demonize him in some way, basically remove him from power, because the things he's proposing to them from their relativistic perspective seem like devilry. When actually it's the opposite. What they've forgotten is actually, it's us who are the devils. See? Which is why the most conscious politicians rarely get elected. Why is that? Because the people who elect them themselves are not very conscious and developed. It's a catch-22 vicious circle. So you need highly conscious and developed citizens to elect a highly conscious leader, because only a high consciousness and developed mind can appreciate another high consciousness and developed mind. But you can't get that high consciousness leader until you have high consciousness people. And you can't get high consciousness people until you have high consciousness leaders. So we're stuck. We're not really stuck. It does move, but it moves slowly. It's got a certain internal molasses, kind of like internal resistance to it. It flows like molasses. And so society evolves like molasses. And that explains quite a bit. And of course, none of this is taught in school. And you might wonder why. And the answer is because school is corrupt. It's part of this whole catch-22. The people who elect the school teachers, principals, the school boards, all that, these are composed of ordinary citizens. Ordinary citizens, they're not self-actualized, enlightened people. They're very simple, they're conformist, they're very traditional. So what they do is they elect leaders who are like them. The teachers and principals who compose the school curriculum, who are they? Well, they're the peers of the ones who elected them. If ever a principal or a school administrator somehow gets into power who is way ahead of the curve, very conscious, very enlightened, very loving, some sort of Jesus-like figure you might imagine, if he ever gets elected to the school board, what will happen is that the changes and reforms that he makes, the critiques he makes of the corruption of the school system, will be so bitter tasting to the people who elected him that they will unelect him. They will kick him out, they will demonize him, and maybe even in prior times they would have killed him. And of course, they would accuse him of corrupting the minds of the children, which is exactly what Socrates was accused of and put to trial and to death for, corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens. See? That's classic projection right there. Another example of classic projection, of course, is Donald Trump. We can't end this episode without talking about him. It should be obvious to you, I hope, that Trump is the most corrupt U.S. president we've ever had. This was obvious before he even came into power, which was the whole point of opposing his coming into power and not voting for him. There was a whole brouhaha about how Hillary Clinton was very corrupt. The reality is that the people who judge Hillary Clinton to be very corrupt have no sense of proportion of corruption. And these people do not understand the dynamics that I'm talking about here. They're mostly stage blue, stage orange style dynamics folks. So they're just acting out of conformity and ideology. And so in that case, the critical piece of insight that was necessary in the 2016 election in the US was that Donald Trump was more corrupt than Hillary Clinton. As corrupt as she was, and I'm not saying she wasn't corrupt, Donald Trump was way more corrupt and is way more corrupt. And if this isn't obvious to you, then you're not thinking objectively. You need to check your self-bias. Because clearly Trump is far less conscious and more selfish and narcissistic than Hillary Clinton. Clearly. Again, if you can't see this, you ain't doing the work. And so the irony of Trump, of course, is that while he ran on the whole notion of draining the swamp and railing against the corruption of Hillary Clinton, of course, that was all projection. Trump won the election in a corrupt way. And he himself has been thoroughly corrupt his entire life. And he runs his whole administration based on corruption and cronyism, starting with his family, his son-in-law, his daughter, his sons, all that, and down to his friends and all the people he appoints. Corruption. Now you might say, well, Leo, it's common for politicians to appoint their friends and so forth to positions. Yes, it's common, but what we have now is the worst it's ever been. This is just blatant corruption. Trump is the king of corruption. That's the irony of it, because he's the king of devils. See? Because he's got such a massive ego. The bigger the ego, the bigger the devil. So in this sense, he's the top. But of course, he doesn't recognize it. His supporters don't recognize it because they're devils too. And all of this is totally predictable. Trump's devilry was totally predictable and obvious long before he came into office. And of course, it's totally predictable that all of his associates often get arrested or get embroiled in various scandals and financial misdeeds. How many of his administration officials have resigned because of some sort of improprieties with misusing public funds for airplane travels and excessive vacations and all this sorts of stuff? I think Ben Carson bought himself like a $30,000 bookshelf into his office or some shit on using public money. So like this kind of stuff. It was completely obvious that all the people who Trump would be surrounded with in his administration would also be as corrupt as him. Because uncorrupted people would never work for a corrupt devil. The people who are Trump's friends who want to work with him are the most corrupt of the most corrupt, because anyone else has already resigned a long time ago. I mean, this is totally predictable. This is textbook stuff. Textbook stuff. You could have predicted this in 2015. Because Trump has zero integrity and he has zero moral development. He's narcissistic, he's opportunistic, he's transactional, he's materialistic, he's pragmatic. He checks every box of what you need to be corrupt. He can't not be corrupt. In fact, his corruption is so deep that we don't even know the tip of the iceberg. We only see the tip of the iceberg of his corruption. Like it's so much worse than you think. We will spend the next decade discovering more and more and more of Trump's corruption, even if once he's kicked out of office or whatever. Just more and more stuff will be coming out, and it's just going to be shocking every single time. Like people are just going to be floored at how much corruption is ultimately discovered, because it can't stay hidden forever. The devil plays in the shadows. He hides stuff. He uses deception, but deception never holds out forever. The truth always prevails in the end. So it's a game he can't win. It's temporary. And if you think what I'm saying here is all partisan hackery, you're missing the point. This goes way beyond partisanship. Corruption is not a partisan point. And you might wonder, well, Leo, why are you being so political and so partisan all the time? I'm not. It's just that you have to understand that consciousness and philosophy has real world consequences. See, if I was sitting here and only teaching you about enlightenment and other kinds of self-actualized theory, and all I taught you was just theory with no real world consequences, then you would accuse me of, oh, Leo, this is just all philosophy. It doesn't matter in the real world. But then when I teach you this stuff and I show you how it connects with the real world, I connect it with current events, I connect it with China, I connect it with Hong Kong, I connect it with Trump, I connect it with Hillary Clinton, all this, we connect it all. Then when you see the actual consequences of what consciousness and love means, then you say, oh, no, Leo, you're being a devil and you're being corrupt and you're projecting your own biases. Why are you being so political all of a sudden? You see, you want it both ways. I get criticized from both sides. Because consciousness is not neutral. When you're conscious, you have a low tolerance for bullshit and for deception and for lies. And when you see a society which is completely entrenched in self-deception, whether it's within science or within religion or within economics, with capitalism, for example, or within the news or within government, business, media, marketing, when you see all this devilry around you, you want to speak up against it. This is what consciousness compels you to do. See? And spiritual teachers and leaders have done this since the beginning of time. Christ, Buddha, others, they've all spoken out against corruption. Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. What was that? Galileo, he spoke out against the corruptions of the Catholic Church. What was that? Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for preaching mysticism against the Catholic Church, even though he was a Catholic monk. You know, this is a story that goes back to the beginning of civilization. You can go back to ancient Egypt 10,000 years ago, and they were executing people for pointing out the corruptions of the pharaoh or whatever. In fact, I think Tutankhamun, I think, King Tut, he died very young. They did some like autopsies on his skull and so forth, on his body and mummy. I think he died when he was still a teenager. Maybe it was a disease, but I think there's a theory that it could have been that people didn't like his father because he was very radical. Actually, he was actually a reformer. He made some significant changes, like the reforms that his father made. His father was a pharaoh. Akhenaten was his name, and he changed the religion from a polytheistic one. He tried to change Egypt to turn it into a monotheistic religion that worshipped the sun, or the Aten. There's some theories that maybe he was deeply enlightened or whatever. And the old guard, the old Egyptians, they didn't like this apparently. So they actually, once King Tut was killed and kicked out of power, their whole family, I think, was kicked out of power basically in some devilish way. And then they erased all of the Aten family's imagery on all the stones and stuff. They erased all of it, like all mention of the Atens and King Tut were all erased from Egyptian history back then. It was sort of a whitewashing because they wanted to go back to the old polytheistic system. That's what happens when you try to teach someone awakening. See, it's as old as time. So the painful truth that Americans need to understand is that Democrats right now and Republicans are not equally corrupt. One party is more corrupt than another. And it's pretty clear which one that is, if you're following the news. And all of this, of course, will go down in history, in the history books. So which side of history are you going to be on? Are you going to be the one who equivocates and draws false equivalence between those who are corrupt and those who are trying to uproot the corruption? Or are you going to participate in clearing up the corruption? Or are you going to deepen the corruption by calling me a partisan for pointing out the obvious corruption that is happening right now with the conservatives and the Republicans and with Trump? See, it really is the case that higher stages of the spiral on spiral dynamics are objectively less corrupt because they're less egotistical. And liberals are higher on the spiral than conservatives. And this is so unpalatable to conservatives to admit this. Now, of course, it's a gross generality. There can be individual exceptions to this rule. But right now, if we're talking about American politics as an example, it should be obvious to you that conservatives are objectively less cognitively developed than liberals. And if you're a conservative, I'm sorry, you don't want to hear that, but it is what it is. It's on you to figure that out. You got to check your self-biases. Why is government corruption so common? Because government is a giant pool of money, billions of dollars of money, and also the ability to print billions of dollars of more money. So that's a giant pool of money that one can leech off of and be a parasite upon. But the biggest source of corruption is not what many conservatives think. It's not the welfare state. It's not poor people. It's not immigrants who are abusing the system. It's the powerful and the wealthy who are the most corrupt and who abuse and manipulate the system the most. By definition, you need power to manipulate the system. Some illegal immigrant is not going to manipulate the system. It's the big honchos who are manipulating the system for billions of dollars. And that's what Trump is distracting you with. While Trump is distracting you with illegal immigrants and other things like that, gay marriage and whatever else conservatives are concerned with, the bigger parasites are leeching billions and even trillions from the system. These are corporate parasites who leech billions through lobbying, deregulation, cutting the size of government, reducing oversight committees, and laxating laws, laxating environmental regulations, getting favorable, cushy government contracts, getting subsidies, military spending, pork projects. This is the true corruption. Everything else is distraction. This is what needs to be rooted out. And as much as third world countries struggle with corruption, right now America is struggling greatly with corruption. The reason that Trump got elected in the first place is because of corruption. The system is corrupted. And the reason it's corrupted is because we have so much legalized bribery in America. And this is a situation that needs to be corrected. You might wonder, but Leo, doesn't government corruption that you're admitting to here, doesn't that mean we need a smaller government, not a bigger one? And the answer is absolutely not. Government corruption is mostly done by large corporations, large players with a lot of power that push around the government. If anything, the government needs to be bigger. It needs to be bigger because the entities it governs must be smaller than it. If the entity it governs becomes larger than the government, then the entity now becomes the government. And the government becomes the governed. It turns upside down. See? A big government is important because it needs to be the umbrella which unifies all the other smaller subsets of society and makes them work holistically, collectively, peacefully together towards a common good. And if this umbrella gets too weak and too small, then the little individual elements, they will break free and they will corrupt it, try to take over it, do a hostile takeover. That's basically what Trump has been doing. The government. See? And that's what a lot of corporations are doing. When you have some giant corporation like Facebook or Apple or Microsoft or Google or Amazon, which has a net worth of $500 billion or something like that, these are extremely powerful. A corporation like this could actually secretly develop nuclear weapons if it wanted to. It has enough resources to do that. It could secretly create an army of its own and take over the government, in theory. I don't think they're actually doing that, but they could if they get too powerful and too ambitious and too greedy. See? But the problem will be that these organizations, if Amazon creates nuclear weapons and an army and takes over the US government by force, you see the problem? The problem is that you have no voting power in Amazon. Amazon is effectively a dictatorship. Or, at the very least, an oligarchy. It's only the people who own the shares, the most shares, Unless you have 1 million stocks of Amazon, you don't have any say or control over Amazon. And how many people have 1 million stocks in Amazon? Probably a handful. So they're going to be the ones who rule everybody else, and no one else is going to get a vote. We've already been there. That's like the medieval times that we came out of. That's what society was like back in the time of the Roman Empire, with emperors and oligarchs controlling everything. See? And then we evolved to a democracy. But now what's happening is that our democracy is devolving back into that old style oligarchy through the corruption. So we need a bigger government, but it's not just about a bigger government for a bigger government's sake. It's also about a better government. The quality is actually more important than the size. So government needs to be cleaned up. And the only people who are going to be able to clean it up are who are themselves clean. So don't be listening to some fool demagogue like Trump who comes along and says that he's going to drain the fucking swamp. He has no interest in draining the swamp. He is the fucking swamp monster from the Black Lagoon. He's not going to drain no swamp. Even if he wanted to drain the swamp, he couldn't do it. He doesn't have the moral, cognitive, or spiritual level of consciousness necessary to achieve that, which is what you see every day on the news, how he isn't able to achieve it. He just, he's digging his own grave, slowly. See? Every generation must do its job in fighting corruption. This is how society is what it is today. No matter where you live in the world, if you think you live in a bad country or a bad situation, I guarantee you it was 10 times worse 1,000 years ago. And 10 times even worse than that 2,000 years ago. And the reason you live in a relatively decent and stable society today, where you can go to the grocery store without getting shanked in the kidneys by some crazy person with a knife, the reason that doesn't happen very often where you live is because of all the blood and tears and sweat that were expended to fight corruption in your society. Society doesn't get this way the way it is today in the 21st century. It doesn't get this way automatically. We had to grow ourselves. We had to literally turn ourselves into a totally different type of human to be able to create and sustain this current society. And we're going to have to keep doing that. We're not done. The US government, like I was saying, is very corrupt currently in terms of how much money goes into politics, how corporations are influencing and lobbying government with legalized bribery and political contributions. And it's your duty as a citizen, if you're a conscious citizen, to stand up and speak out against this corruption, because this corruption is preventing us from being able to elevate the consciousness and love of everyone around us, which is the point of life. What we need is a constitutional amendment to end money in politics, and we need total public financing of elections. It should be illegal for a corporation to contribute money to a super PAC or to have dark money. All of this needs to be publicly funded, because this is corrupting the very notion of one person, one vote. Right now, the people who elect the politicians are not the little people. It's not one person, one vote. It's the people who have billions of dollars who are able to run ads. And these ads, of course, are one of the embodiments, one of the epitomes of devilry. These ads are always self-biased, and they're never concerned about truth or consciousness or love, but purely winning for the sake of winning. So towards this end, I have something very practical for you, which is there's an organization called Wolf-PAC. It's a nonprofit organization. It's a PAC that was started to get money out of politics by passing a constitutional amendment. If you live in the United States, I recommend you make a donation. Go to Wolf-PAC, spelled P-A-C without a K, just P-A-C, wolf-pac.com, and there's a donate button there where you can go and make a donation. Even something as small as $5 is helpful. Today, before I started this episode, I donated $1,000. So here's the receipt. You can take a look. I'll post it for you on this video. I'll post the link to wolfpac.com down below. You can click on it, make a small contribution. I think this is one of the most important causes, politically speaking, that we can tackle right now. It's a non-political group. This is not designed to help the Democrats or the Republicans. We're just interested here with this initiative of passing a constitutional amendment and to ban private money in our elections. If you're not an American, you're watching from somewhere else, well, find some other way to participate in the reducing of corruption in your local community or country. It doesn't necessarily have to be through this website. I'm just putting this website out to you, and I'm not really affiliated with them in any way. I'm just passionate about what they're promoting, and I wanted to give it some views and some free publicity. First of all, because this episode ties in with it so nicely, and because it's such a hot topic right now. But also because I wanted to show you how the theory that I talk about is not just theory. That's what's different about Actualized.org from philosophy that you get in some philosophy fucking class, philosophy 101 in your university. In your university class, they just talk about old dead philosophers, and it's just it's completely disconnected from reality. But here, we're connecting it all. We're connecting the politics, we're connecting your own personal growth, we're connecting enlightenment, we're all these advanced, complex things, and then we're connecting, and then we're showing you how it all drills down to just the nitty-gritty of going to a website and donating $5. And that's how you make change. See? You need to be able to go up and down this chain of big picture to little minutia. You need to master this process of going up and down. Don't get lost in getting stuck in the minutia and not seeing the big picture, or just being in airy fairyland talking about big picture ideals and ideas about awakening, but then not doing any work and any practices. You need both to be successful. That's one of the most important things I can teach you, is that. So start to connect the dots. Start to connect the theory with the practice. The first step in ending corruption is to admit that you are corrupt. So as a homework assignment, I want you to start to notice your own corruptions. What do I mean by this? I mean little things like fudging the numbers on your taxes every year, manipulating your spouse to get what you want out of her or him, torrenting, downloading illegal copyrighted material, stealing office supplies, exploiting a situation to get sex, favoring your crony friends. Maybe at work, you put a recommendation for your friend who maybe isn't quite qualified for the new job that's opened up, but you tell your boss that he's actually really good, much better than he is, just because, he's your friend and you want your friend to work next to you, and that's cronyism. Cheating in a video game. That's corruption. Lying is corruption. Littering is corruption. Cheating on a test at school, that's corruption. Exaggerating on your resume is corruption. Trying to get favors from people is corruption. Cutting corners at work. Turning in some shoddy work, that's corruption. Laziness, greed, envy, anger, notice this. Notice how this leads to corruption within you. Notice your fear and how that leads to your corruption. Your entire thinking process is corrupted by fear and by greed, by laziness, by hatred, by judgment. Thinking you deserve special treatment in certain situations. That's corruption. Lying to get a better deal on something you're going to buy. That's corruption. Notice especially when you're craving for things, when you have a deep craving for something, whether it's food or sex or money or whatever it is, how that corrupts you. You need to observe this on a micro level, just like you did with fear from that fear episode where I told you to observe your micro fears. Well, now observe your micro corruptions. Observe how your worldview is distorted by your survival needs. Observe the ideologies that you adopt in order to get your way in life, to manipulate life, and observe the excuses you make and the justifications and rationalizations you make to hand wave it away and to make it seem like it's all okay and it's not corruption. All of these little things, like I told you, they're going to expand out into a giant chasm when you get more power, more money, more fame, and you become a leader, more responsibility. It's especially important that you do what I'm telling you here if you plan on being any kind of leader. This is the thing that prevents you from abusing my teachings. If you don't do this and you plan on having a life purpose where you go out there and transform the world, this whole spiel, if you've taken my life purpose course, you're going to be a devil. And I don't want to create devils. So start observing this stuff. How is corruption solved overall? Well, first and foremost, just by the light of awareness. Remember on my episode where I said awareness alone is curative? Well, awareness is curative. As we're seeing Trump behave like a devil in front of the cameras, that camera light that's shining on him literally is bringing forth his own devilry and materialism and narcissism and broadcasting to the entire world how ugly that is. That's helping people. That's helping us to evolve and advance as a society. That's necessary. So don't think that Trump is a step backwards. Trump is a step forwards in the counterintuitive sense that sometimes you got to see how ugly your behavior is before you can correct it. Corruption is solved by truth. Corruption is falsehood, and truth does conquer falsehood in the end. But in the short term, falsehood can win out sometimes. Lying does work in the short term, which is why you do it. Another way corruption is solved is that it autocorrects over generations. It will autocorrect because of this larger theme of life, which is that evolution increases consciousness and love. That is what evolution is. It's the steady increase of consciousness and love. So corruption will slowly be reduced further and further and further, but also as new technological fields open up, new corruption will emerge there, like we talked about with the kind of social media examples and the devil learning how to use technology. By passing better laws and having a better legal system, that's very important to shore up our legal system. And of course, Trump is showing us the importance of having a high-quality, uncorrupted legal system for keeping his devilry in check. Corruption is stopped by the evolution of culture. Culture is always evolving, new norms are forming, new values. Culture is moving up the spiral as well as the individuals, and so that helps to eliminate corruption. A better education system is very important. That's a very deep topic. I'll have a whole separate episode about how to fix our education system and all the corruptions of it. Corruption is also solved simply by meeting people's basic needs. Increase the overall wealth and prosperity of the society, and then people have less need to be corrupt. It's very hard to tell people in a country like Liberia, where they're literally shitting on the streets for lack of public toilets and eating dead bodies for lack of food, cannibalism. When they have to resort to cannibalism and whoring and all this sorts of stuff just to make ends meet, it's really hard to tell these people to give up their corruption. They can't do it. Their life depends upon it. So what we can do, though, is we can elevate the quality of life, build more houses, reduce disease in third world countries, help them to generate clean power and other things like this, help them with education, maybe through new online mediums, give them internet access and this sort of stuff. And in this way, we can reduce corruption. And then, of course, by doing that, we can also eliminate terrorism, which is nice. We can reduce war, which is nice. We can reduce genocide. We can reduce nationalist movements. We can reduce rape. We can reduce religious indoctrination, all that good stuff. And corruption is ultimately solved through the moral developmental line and the spiritual developmental line. As you become more truly spiritual, not in name, but actually in practice, corruption stops. So start purifying yourself of your own corrupt tendencies right now. And you can do that by starting to ask the question, what are all the ways in which you are corrupt? How does corruption hold you back from greatness? Contemplate that question. How does corruption hold you back from actualizing your full vision for your life purpose? And practically speaking, there's a lot of different techniques I've shared with you that will help you with resolving personal corruption, such as plugging holes in your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, fulfilling your basic needs, master your career, find a way to make money in a healthy way, then you're going to be less desperate. Clearing out your lower chakras, I haven't talked about that much, but you can find resources for how to do that. The letting go technique is great for letting go of various emotions that make you corrupt and various cravings and so forth. Kriya Yoga, meditation, of course, this all helps. Self-inquiry helps. Shadow work helps. I'll have an episode on that in the future. What's it called? Shamanic breathing. Check out my episode on shamanic breathing. That technique can help you to purge. Literally, you can feel the corruption purging from your body and mind with that technique. Journaling and introspection, contemplation. I have many episodes that teach you how to do contemplation. Psychedelics, of course, are very helpful. Facing your fears. My 2 episodes about understanding fear and how fear works. That's very helpful. Opening your heart, being more loving is also very helpful. And I'll have episodes in the future about how to open your heart and how to be more loving. But of course, these are personal things you do, which are important, but also you need to take collective action as well, which is why I gave you that example with the Wolf-PAC, because that would be an example of a collective action. See, it's not just enough for you to open your heart. We also need to pass a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, for example, in America. The ultimate solution to corruption is consciousness, truth, love, and spirit, ego dissolution, and transparency. Transparency is just another word for awareness. Imagine, for example, if your life was lived with 100% transparency. That means that a camera followed you around everywhere you went, no matter what you did 24/7. And this was broadcast on TV all the time. That means that everybody in the world knew your schemes. They knew what you were doing. They knew what you were up to. They knew all of your secrets. And imagine the camera could even, like we even plugged a computer wire into your skull, and we could even read your intentions, your thoughts, and your emotions, and how you feel. And all of this was broadcast to the entire world. So that if you had a corrupt thought, if you had a thought like, ooh, I want to grab that woman's tits, or it's like, ooh, I want to steal some of that money. It's like, ooh, I want to whatever. I want to steal some of that candy from that baby. You have these corrupt thoughts, or like you have some sort of desire like, oh, I want to cheat on my wife or whatever. You have this, but it was immediately broadcast to everybody. See? What you should realize is that your corruption couldn't be sustained because your corruption only works in the shadows. Many of your thoughts and emotions are very toxic and selfish and negative because they're so private to you and there's nobody to hold them in check but you. And of course, you won't do it because you're self-biased. So the reason I'm telling you all this is that if you're more transparent in your thoughts, words, and actions, that will help a lot. If you scheme and you manipulate and you hide your intentions a lot, that's gonna produce shadows in which corruption can hide. Remember also not to be too quick to judge the corruptions of others. It's very difficult to rid yourself of all corruptions. This is a superhuman task. This is a godly task. This is your life's work. So before you judge others, first fix yourself. Worry more on fixing yourself, or perhaps contributing to good causes like Wolf-PAC. And also have compassion for corrupt people. I notice this tendency within the media, on YouTube and elsewhere. Some video comes out with some latest person who's corrupt, and then everybody dogpiles on that corrupt person and calls him a devil and evil and blah, 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 blah. But the compassion is missing. Corrupt people are not really evil. They're simply lost in unconsciousness. They simply weren't educated properly. They simply don't understand what they're doing. They're scared. They're scared of death. They're scared of spiritual work. They're scared of love. They're just trying to survive. Have compassion for that. And have compassion for your own corruptions too. See? Because if you judge others harshly for being corrupt, you will also have to judge yourself for your own corruptions. If you judge yourself too much for your own corruptions, you won't even admit your own corruptions. And you'll be very corrupt. So, paradoxically, hating corruption doesn't solve corruption. It increases corruption. Because hatred is a low consciousness reaction. Low consciousness produces low consciousness. Birds of a feather flock together. If you want to eliminate corruption within yourself and others, practice love. Love the corruption to death, just like I told you to love the evil to death. Same thing. It's okay to admit that you're selfish. It's okay to love yourself even though you're selfish and you struggle to let go of a certain corruption or a certain selfish craving that you have. that you know you should be able to let go, but you just can't let it go. That's fine. That's where you're at. Accept that. Love yourself for being that way. That will help you to overcome it. It's not going to work by making yourself feel guilty and hating yourself. And also, I have a corruption worksheet for you. So click the link down below in the description under the video. You'll find this corruption worksheet. Fill it out. That will help you to get a little bit more of a awareness of your own corruption. And lastly, I'll just remind you to, if you want, if you're an American, go donate to Wolf-PAC.com. Even if it's just $5. I'm not affiliated with them. I don't get any money from them. They don't pay me. This is not a sponsorship. I'm just putting it out there because when I originally conceived of this idea of an episode about corruption, I knew this would be a powerful, deep episode. And immediately I got the urge to talk about Wolf-PAC because it's such a practical and reasonable and common sense way to just tackle the root of this problem, at least within American politics right now. All right, that's it. I'm done here. This is the end. Please click that like button for me and come check out Actualized.org. There you will find my book list, the Life Purpose course, my blog where I post a lot of stuff, and resources and videos that I share almost on a daily basis. You'll find the forum there. You'll also find my Patreon donation link down below if you want to support my work. I'm very grateful for that. I'll probably be, once I get my new camera, I'll probably show it off to you guys. And maybe I'll have some exclusive Patreon stuff in the future. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to handle the Patreon is. But I'm definitely going to be using those funds right now to be making various kinds of improvements and trying to funnel that money back towards value to you. And the last thing that I'll say here to wrap up is that Actualized.org is focused on big picture understanding of reality and life. These teachings are rather advanced. They're too abstract for many people because many people are still down at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, down here on the lower half. They're still struggling with their basic survival needs. I have some older content which was focused on helping you to meet your survival needs. Today, I mostly talk about being needs, not survival needs. And I understand that for many of you, you're not ready for that. You need to spend a good 5-10 years going really hard on your survival needs, mastering those, mastering your career and so forth. And I will still have content for you going forward, but I just want to warn you, supplement what you learn from me with other more basic sources that teach you just simple stuff. Because my interest was never with my work, to teach very, very simple stuff on how to meet your basic survival needs. My vision was always to go for the biggest picture understanding. And really, you need both. It's not one or the other, you need both. But I only have so much time and energy in my life, and my time is already seriously consumed by just the big picture topics that I talk about. That said, I will have some very practical courses in the future that I'll release. I'm working on one right now, actually. Probably should come out in the next 6 months, I'm hoping. So that will be useful. But, and it's not to say that my big picture topics aren't useful. They're extremely useful. The problem is that they're so abstract for many of you that you don't know how to make use of them. So what I recommend is that you supplement my teachings, my channel, with more basic stuff that just teaches you how to earn some money, how to write a resume, how to develop some technical skill, how to do a job interview so you're hired, how to maybe deal with a problem in your relationship, this sort of stuff, right? I in a certain sense, this stuff is too small for me. These are small fish. I don't like frying small fish. I want to fry giant whales. So that's what mostly I'm focused on. And then once you do satisfy a lot of the basic stuff, once you do fry a bunch of small fish, then you'll really be ready to take in the depth of what I'm offering you with the big whales. And it'll all interconnect and work beautifully in your life. But this work we're doing, this is we have the longest time horizon here, right? Like, my whole vision for you is that you're going to be following this content for 10 years, for 20 years, for your whole life. You're going to be following this content. Don't get this idea that, oh, I'm going to watch Leo for a year or two, fix all my whole life, and then just go about my life. And like, no, you're going to have 20 years of learnings here, at least 20 years of learnings. Don't think you're above any of this. You're just getting started. Even if you've done a few psychedelics, you're just getting started. Even if you've earned a little bit of money, you're just getting started. Even if you've had an awakening or two, you're just getting started. I can't stress that enough. So really be patient with this. Appreciate how important these conversations are that we're having. This is laying the foundation, the theoretical foundation for the rest of your life. This is not a waste of time. This is not you just watching some YouTube videos the way it might seem. There's a difference between different kinds of videos. Some videos waste your time. Some videos might help you a little bit here and there, but don't solve anything fundamentally. And some videos will change the entire trajectory of your life. But it's those that require a long time horizon, because we can't change the entire trajectory of your life with one video in 1 week or in 1 month or even in 1 year. It's cumulative effects that stack together. So if you really want to extract the full value of what I'm offering to you here, then plan for the long term. Take notes. Be patient. Don't expect immediate results. Right now, you might have watched this episode. You might think, well, Leo, how does this corruption topic help me? It doesn't help me in my practical life. One day will come where it will help you. You may not be there yet, but just because you have this in the back of your mind is already going to be enough that one day, maybe 5 years from now, that you do get to that day where it could make or break you. You're going to have that in the back of your mind, that memory of like, oh yeah, Leo was mumbling on and on about corruption. He was talking about how important it's going to be one day. And here it is. This is the day. And sure enough, it makes a lot of difference. And then also don't underestimate the critical mass of understanding that's going to be built here. By watching this stuff, yeah, you watch 10 videos. Okay, that's nice. 20 videos. Okay, you connect some dots. It makes a little bit more sense. But when you watch 300 videos, when you connect them all together, when you contemplate them, when you do practice, all this gels together. You're reading books and this, you're doing retreats. All of it's going to come together. At some point, you're going to reach this critical mass like I have, where it's the most remarkable thing. And this is really the whole point of all my teachings, is to get you to reach a critical mass of understanding where literally you can walk down the street and it feels like you understand all of life. You understand why every leaf and blade of grass is doing whatever it's doing, why every car is zooming by, why every bird is flying overhead, why all of this stuff is happening, why politics is the way it is, why religion is the way it is, why science is the way it is, why humans behave how they do. All of it will be transparent to you, and that's really what jazzes me up. That's what makes me most passionate about this work. To me, that's what I'm for. I'm for understanding. Infinite understanding. I want to show you infinite understanding. I want to lead you to infinite understanding, because with that, I think that is the magic key that unlocks for you all of life.